Ladies and gentlemen, let us all rise for the arrival of the Honorable Senate President. Ba't nagsenyas kayo? No, sorry, false alarm. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all rise for the arrival of the Honorable Senate President and the Senators of the Republic of the Philippines.
The 51st session of the Senate in the first regular session of the 18th Congress is hereby called to order. The Minority Leader, Senator Franklin M. Drilon, will lead the chamber in prayer.
Mr. President, let us put ourselves in the loving presence of the Lord. Almighty God, we stand before you today to humbly thank you for the countless ways you have blessed us. Our hearts are filled with adoration as we come to you in praise. Father, let your love cast out our fears, especially during these trying times. You are our healer and redeemer. We trust that you will bring healing from all sickness and give courage to those in distress. You are our refuge and our strength. We believe that with your divine guidance, we will conquer every difficulty that come our way. Lord, be our guide in today's proceedings. May you shower us with your vision for us to think and act right as a way of serving you. We humbly seek to be good stewards of your grace. Grant that we may become your living instruments for the benefit and well-being of your people. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. The Secretary will please call the roll.
Roll call of members, the Honorable Senators Angara, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, De La Rosa, Drilon, Gatchalian, Go, Gordon, Ontiveros, Lacson, Lapid, Marcos, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Tolentino, Villanueva, Villar, Zubiri, Senate President Soto III.
With 18 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the Journal of the 50th Session, Tuesday, February 4, 2020. Consider the same as approved.
Any objection? Hearing none, journals approved.
Mr. President, last Monday, I recall changing referral of the measure. Let me just get the particular measure, Mr. President. I recall that we moved to transfer the referral of SBN 1138, an act strengthening local government participation in agricultural development by institutionalizing a 10% allocation for the ERA for the implementation of programs and activities. We moved it, we transferred it to the Committee on Agriculture as primary committee and secondary committee, the Committee on Local Government. Mr. President, I move to reconsider my motion, or I'd like to recall that motion, Mr. President, for reconsideration, and that with the permission of the chairperson of the Committee on Local Government, instead create a subcommittee, Mr. President, which will be headed by no other than Senator Cynthia Villar to tackle this particular Senate bill number. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. So there will be a subcommittee on this particular issue. Senator Villar is the chairperson of the subcommittee. Thank you, Mr. President.
We place that on record.
And to allow, and Committee on Agriculture and Food, Mr. President, to still remain as the secondary committee. Mr. President, I move to proceed with the reference of business.
Secretary will proceed with reference of business.
Reference of business, bills on first reading. Senate number 1320 entitled An Act Prohibiting the Use of BPA in Baby Food Packaging and Containers and Other Child Care Articles, providing for its replacement and safer alternatives, introduced by Senator Binay.
Referred to the Committees on Trade and Health.
Senate number 1321, an act establishing a special defense economic zone inside the Government Arsenal Defense Industrial Estate located in Camp General Antonio Luna, Lamao, Municipality of Limay, Province of Bataan, creating for this purpose the Special Defense Economic Zone Authority and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Recto.
Referred to the Committees on Economic Affairs, National Defense, Ways and Means, and Finance.
Senate number 1322, an act mandating the integration of the National Building Code of the Philippines under Republic Act number 6541, entitled An Act to Ordain and Institute a National Building Code of the Philippines as a major subject in the curriculum of Bachelor of Science degree programs in Civil Engineering, Mechanical Engineering, Electrical Engineering, Sanitary Engineering, Electronics Engineering, and Architecture, and its inclusion as a topic in the licensure examinations for these professions, introduced by Senator Revilla Jr.
Referred to the Committees on Higher Education, Civil Service, and Civil Service.
Senate number 1323, an act creating the Department of Overseas Filipino Workers, defining its powers and functions, appropriating funds therefore, and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committee on Labor, Foreign Relations, and Finance. Majority Leader.
Okay. Mr. President, may we recognize the distinguished chairman of the Committee on Accounts for some, I believe, some good news, Mr. President. Senator Lacson.
Senator Ping Lacson, the gentleman from Cavite.
Thank you,
is recognized.
Mr. President. This will be a very short manifestation on the progress of the Senate's collective effort to build our new home, envisioned to be a national landmark, an iconic, green, functional, and secure bagong Senado. Since the Senate embarked on the new Senate building project in November of 2017 through PS Resolution number 293, authored by our distinguished colleague, the Honorable Sherwin Gatchalian, we have completed significant milestones. Starting with the conduct of our conceptual design competition, we have already concluded the procurement phase through a design and build package with the Department of Public Works and Highways. Likewise, Mr. President, we already secured the Environmental Compliance Certificate, or ECC, tree cutting and bowling permit, locational clearance, CAAP height clearance, fencing, and excavation permits, and most importantly, the building permit. Suffice to say, Mr. President, we do not have any more pending bureaucratic requirements that may delay our work. As an overview, our new building, which will rise in the 18,320 square meters of land at the Navy Village, Port Bonifacio, Taguig City, will consist of 4 towers with 11 floors and 3 basement levels. Just last March 18, 2019, we convened for the groundbreaking ceremony which marked the start of the construction of the new building. As we speak, excavation works are complete and the building foundations have been prepared with reinforcing steel bars ready to receive its first pouring of concrete. Mr. President, at this juncture, I am inviting the members of this body to join the first concrete pouring ceremony tomorrow, February 6, 2020, at 9 in the morning. Just so everyone knows, the first concrete pouring is a tradition of symbolic milestone in all engineering programs, private or public, to mark the beginning of monolithic works. But the concrete that we are pouring tomorrow morning is not just for ceremonial display, as in many similar engineering works. Our activity will start the actual massive pouring of concrete that will serve as the cornerstone and the very foundation of the new Senate building, which will represent the continuing legacy of this great independent institution. The commitment of your Senate Committee on Accounts, Mr. President, still stands. Senate President Vicente Tito Soto III will open the 3rd regular session of the 18th Congress in our new home in Taguig City. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you for that information.
Yes, Mr.
I'd
President.
like to congratulate the chairman of the Committee on Accounts, of course, with the help of Senator Gatchalian, that it is ongoing and they are right on target.
Everyone is excited, Mr. President, our staff, personnel, the secretariat, as well as the members of the Senate, Mr. President. And we're happy to hear that on the 3rd regular session, we may still have sessions in the new building. Natutuwa po yung ating minority floor leader. I think, like you, he's also on his last term, I believe, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, may we also recognize a distinguished lady senator from Taguig, where the building is being built, Senator Pia Cayetano, for her privileged speech, Mr. President. May we recognize
Senator Pia Cayetano, the distinguished lady from Taguig and Pateros, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I ask that the screen be brought down? I have some slides to show. Okay.
The screens, please.
It's just ayun. I thought it was bigger.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today on a personal and collective privilege. In June 2012, almost 8 years ago, I sponsored the National Liver Cancer and Viral Hepatitis Awareness and Prevention Act with the primary objective of spreading awareness on liver cancer and viral hepatitis. In that bill, we declared January as the Awareness Month, and today it is Republic Act 10526. This is a few minutes delayed because it is actually February 5, but it is my solemn and personal duty to help create and stir awareness on this very deadly virus. Hepatitis B is a potentially deadly virus and the leading cause of liver cancer, liver disease. Per the WHO, around 8.5 million Filipinos are living with chronic hepatitis B virus. So for a visual, my dear colleagues, consider that similar to the number of OFWs we have. I'm not equating them with OFWs. I'm simply saying in terms of the number of people who are living with chronic hepatitis B, ganun karami yun. WHO's 2019 data shows that 1 in 10, so a tenth of Filipinos have chronic hepatitis B. Hepatitis is a silent killer. It has no symptoms but quietly damages the liver. In fact, what is sad here, it is known to hit you at the prime of your life, at the productive years of your life, usually in somebody's 40s when they are mothers and fathers of their families with children fully dependent on them. WHO data shows that hepatitis causes 60% of liver cancer ailments in the Philippines in 2019. Many of you will recall that my father was a senator at that time and at the prime of his life. He was 68 years old, or I think 67, when when the hepatitis B virus that he had mutated, and at that time there was no medication for that mutated virus. There was one in the US, but by the time it literally arrived here via FedEx, I think, his liver was very damaged and it was no longer of use to him. And thus he was told that he needs a liver transplant. And we did that in the United States. My youngest brother, Lino, who is now the mayor of Taguig City, was my dad's surprise donor. My dad did not know that Lino was his donor. So we had that liver transplant in 2003, and for those who are not familiar with liver cancer or with liver transplants, Lino lived with a third of his liver because he gave 2/3 of his liver to my dad. And that is possible. And interestingly enough, 4 months after his liver transplant, Lino and I ran a duathlon. So we were told that he is the first liver donor who was able to do such a physical feat. Sadly, although the procedure was very successful, and if you look at the color of my dad there versus the picture before that, he was very healthy and he was recovering. But apparently, some of the cancer cells might have been microscopic size, and they probably were in other parts of his body, so he was eventually diagnosed with stomach cancer, and that's the cause of his death. Fast forward, I became a senator in 2004, and at that time, my dad had just passed away, and it was one of my passions, one of my personal conviction that I would also help spread information about this deadly virus. I found out that the budget for hepatitis B vaccination was about to run out because at that time it was currently sponsored by UNICEF. And without a budget coming from Congress, the children, the millions of children that were now vaccinated by the funding of UNICEF would run out. So because of our initiatives, along with, of course, a lot of medical practitioners and advocates, we were able eventually to include this as part of the regular budget of the DOH. And then eventually, we were able to pass a law wherein we provided more details on the importance of the hepatitis B vaccination that must be administered within 24 hours of birth because the most common mode of transmission is mother to child. So if a baby is vaccinated within 24 hours, they get that immunity. My dear colleagues, there is so much more that we can do to save lives against these diseases. Per UNICEF's 2018 report, the proportion of Filipino children aged 12, young people and children aged 12 to 23 months who receive basic vaccinations, including Hep B, dropped from 77% in 2013 to 70%. My dear colleagues, you will recall that I'm not sure what year, but for the past decade, in the decade before this decade, we were already around 90%. And in previous deliberations on the Senate floor, including a very interesting one I had with the minority floor leader, we established the fact that our vaccination rates have gone down, and this includes hepatitis and others. The percentage of children with no vaccination also rose from 4% in 2013 to 9% in 2017. And that is also why you will see the rise in the case of polio. There was a case reported in the papers. I digress a bit, but this is about the importance of vaccinations. There was a case reported in the papers around 2 weeks ago about a child who was immunized with the polio vaccine and yet got polio. And what I wanted to emphasize, because I didn't find the explanation of DOH to be as clearly as it could have been, the immunization, the immunity, the herd immunity that is created when there is a high level of vaccination, a high percentage of vaccination, does not work when there is a low level of vaccination. So itong bata, kahit na pinabakuna siya ng nanay niya, siguro yung mga classmate niya, yung mga kapitbahay niya, hindi na bakunahan. So siya ngayon with poor health, kasi po pag hindi maganda ang kalusugan natin, tayo ang pinaka-vulnerable, itong mga batang to, kahit na bakunahan, wala ng herd immunity. And that is why vaccination for all is very, very important. I will now stress that this is part of our commitments under our objectives to have sustainable development in our country, including achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Goal number 3 is to ensure healthy lives and promote wellness for all ages. This includes ending the epidemics on AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and neglected tropical diseases, and combating hepatitis and waterborne diseases and other communicable diseases. It also includes reducing by 1/3 premature mortality from non-communicable diseases through prevention and treatment and the promotion of mental health and well-being. So, my dear colleagues, there is so much more for us to do, but with increased awareness and the right information, because just the other day also, I read that the WHO has issued a statement that we are also in a epidemic situation on the spread of wrong information. So the spread of wrong information is just as deadly as the spread of the virus itself. That's why I emphasize increased awareness with the right information and implementations of our policies and laws. With the help of everyone, Mr. President, I believe that we can beat viral hepatitis and other communicable diseases, including the novel coronavirus. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Yeah, you want it to be placed in what you call it? Committee on
Sustainable Development
Sustainable
Goals.
Development. Mr. President, I move that we refer the speech of the lady senator to our Committee on Sustainable Development Goals.
All right, any objection? Hearing none, the speech of the distinguished lady is referred.
Ready ka na sa amendment? May I just ask for 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Ready to issue, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Mr. President, I move that we continue consideration Senate Bill number 1211. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of 1211 is in order.
Mr. President, we are in the period of amendments. For this measure, may we recognize Senator Francis Tolentino for the committee amendments.
Senator Francis Tolentino is recognized for the period of committee amendments on 1211.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since this is a substitute bill, this representation will no longer be submitting committee amendments, but would pursue the individual amendments, culling
yeah.
from the various discussions with the members of this body, as well as lifting from the suggestions coming from the Honorable Minority Leader, Mr. President.
All right, then you may proceed. We are in the period of individual amendments. We are on page 1.
Yes, Mr. President, for page 1, line number 8, after the word units, insert the comma, insert the phrase consistent with national transportation policies, comma, Mr. President. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Still on the same page, Mr. President, page 1, line number 8, replace the words shall endeavor with the words are empowered. Mr. President, I so
Are
move.
empowered. Any objection? The minority leader is recognized before we act on the motion.
Mr. President, with the indulgence of the good sponsor, may we be given, after, I have no objections to the introduction, but with the understanding that after reviewing the proposed amendments, maybe we can call this again, and that should not prevent us from asking questions on the proposed amendments that is being proposed. The approval, in other words, should not prevent us from submitting our own amendments, Mr.
All right.
President, with the permission of the gentleman.
Yes, hearing no objection from the floor, we hereby agree or concur with the manifestation of the minority leader. So you may proceed, and we are still on page 1,
Page 1.
line 8, replace shall endeavor with are empowered. Any
Are-
objection?
Mr. President, are empowered to. Mr.
Are
President,
empowered
first.
too.
Yes,
Any
Mr.
objection? Hearing none, amendment is adopted.
On page 2, Mr. President, line
Wait, before we do
line-
that, may we recognize Senator Ralph Recto, the President Pro Tem.
Two queries, Mr. President. First query on line 8. When we talk about all local government units, are we also talking about barangays?
Mr. President, the original proposal is to have only highly urbanized local government units. But further study made by the committee showed that other independent component cities would likewise qualify. But
So
relative
essentially
to the-
cities only?
Yes, Mr. President. But relative to the query of the good gentleman from Batangas, the barangays would not qualify because
Yes.
there is a budgetary requirement that would be consistent with Section 33 of the Local Government Code, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, to clarify, this would refer to provinces and
Cities.
independent component cities, and perhaps other municipalities if they cluster together, if they aggregate themselves, forming as one entity.
Yes.
That would probably make them qualify because of financial viability, Mr. President.
But listening to the explanation of the distinguished gentleman from Cavite, that means if a barangay is capable, they may.
I don't see, Mr. President, I don't see any barangay qualifying since, for example, if you have 10 San Lorenzo villages, but for this purpose, Mr. President,
Are you not including them? Are you saying that they're not included because they will not be capable financially, or you do not want them?
Mr.
Do you
President,
not want to give them the power?
Mr. President, because the intention of this bill is to have a wider transportation system that would encompass a local territory, Mr. President. And a barangay probably would not fit in a monorail, for instance, Mr. President. So this would probably be related just for cities or big provinces or a metropolitan area, Mr. President.
Second issue, Mr. President.
So are you satisfied with the answer, Senator Recto?
Yes, I'm satisfied,
So
Mr. President.
we need not elaborate here who are qualified as
Yes,
LGUs.
yes, that is correct, Mr. President. The second point,
The minority leader does not agree. You are recognized.
Mr. President, with all due respect, I think we cannot make the power or lack of power of the barangay on the whether or not they have the financial capability. Um, I don't think that's a proper way of doing it. It's either we include them or we specify who are the local government units. Because the way it is phrased now, a barangay can undertake this activity. So may I just apropos the question of the Senate President pro tempore and the questions of the Senate President, we would propose that we specify the local government units who would be empowered to undertake this project. And
An example, perhaps, would be, say, a monorail that will be built from North Forge to Forge Park. Are we going to allow that?
Mr. President, if I may reply,
They can. They might.
theoretically, Mr. President, but if we look at the threshold requirement for a transport system in various jurisdictions, that would mean almost 1 million passengers, Mr. President. So even if Forbes Park or San Lorenzo Village would qualify as to the financial resources required, the number of passengers that would make a transport system viable, efficient, sustainable, would probably be the lacking requisite, Mr. President. Because we're talking here of a mass transport system, Mr. President.
Yes, precisely the point, Mr. President. And let me,
Go ahead,
my
Senator
second
Recto.
query, yes, with the permission of the President and the sponsor. My second query is that, are local governments today prohibited from doing this?
Mr. President, that's a good question, Mr. President. They are not prohibited, but the requirements are really cumbersome. And I surmise the gentleman from Batangas, the former NEDA Secretary General, is aware of the processes, steps required for a local government unit to reach that NEDA ICC stage approval and thereafter the NEDA board approval, which would require years and years. And if I may add, Mr. President, there is only one project that has surpassed all the stages, Mr. President, and it is a Calibo slaughterhouse, Mr. President, project, not even a transport system. So this will enable the LGUs to really find an open window and perhaps turbocharge, again, repeating my previous word, to unleash their creativity insofar as transport demands and systems are concerned, Mr. President.
Correct. So therefore, they are not prohibited to begin with. And nothing in this bill talks about how to enhance the process as well.
Yeah, there is, Mr. President, if I'll be allowed to proceed with the succeeding amendments this representation will propose.
Yes, but not in the bill yet. No, I'm willing to listen to the amendment. Now, one other point, Mr. I'm not against the bill. I'm just saying that at the moment, no local government is prohibited from trying to endeavor to have a mass transit system. It's just a matter of technical capability, financial capability, and the cumbersome process that you need to undertake, whether through PPP or going through the NEDA board, or whether to secure loans, foreign or domestic. But having said that, Mr. President, one final point on this measure. Because I read in the committee report that this committee report also took into consideration a Senate bill which I filed, Senate Bill number 1065, which I introduced. And the title of this bill is totally different from this particular committee report. No? And the title of my bill was An Act Accelerating Public Sector Investments in Local Infrastructure, establishing for the purpose the local build program, providing funds therefore and for other purposes. And rightfully, it was given to the committee on, it was referred to the Committee on Local Government. Essentially, my bill talks about what the local government, how the local government will spend the additional era that they will have by 2020? 2022. There is a Supreme Court ruling on defining the sharing of ERA 60/40, which includes now the revenues collected by the Bureau of Customs. Having said that, in today's value, the increase in ERA collection will roughly be about 150 billion in today's value. But by 2022, the value will roughly be about 250 billion. A 30% increase. 30% increase in ERA for all local government units nationwide, which is barangay, municipality, city, and province, okay? That is based on the Supreme Court ruling. Now, there has been a debate in public, the Department of Finance saying that Congress passed a law reducing the share of local governments para hindi tumaas yung ERA nila, or that we pass a law stating how the local government will spend that money. Okay, that is the recommendation of the Department of Finance. And taking cue from that, I filed the bill I filed two bills, Mr. President. One is to give the local government, to give Congress a choice between what do we do with the 250 billion additional ERA to be given to local governments by the year 2022. Either one, we use that for capital investment, such as build, infrastructure related, could be roads, could be highways, bridges, transport system, so on and so forth, or to fund the Magna Carta for barangays. And or a part of it could be used also for the salary adjustment of local government based on SSL 5. Because today, wala naman ang SSL 5 sa local government. So I filed these several bills for the local governments to choose from. Now, the point I'm trying to drive at here is that this bill is totally different from the committee report and Senate Bill number 1012. And with the permission of the sponsor, I'm not against this measure. All I'm saying is that this bill should be tackled differently from this proposal. It should not be consolidated in a committee report, as we are discussing today, under committee report number, committee report to? Or Senate Bill number 1211.
25.
Committee report 25, Senate Bill number 1211, Mr. President, because it's a totally different subject matter. So if we discuss this here, ibig sabihin, hindi na mai-hear yung Senate Bill number 1065.
Mr. President,
Yes.
if I may be allowed to reply. To clarify this, Mr. President, the contents and spirit of the bill filed by the distinguished gentleman from Batangas related to transportation was lifted and encapsulated in this bill, Mr. President. But we assure the good gentleman that the bill, if this body would really agree as to the ERA implications of the Mandanas Supreme Court ruling, perhaps in another bill that can be filed by the good gentleman, we are more than willing to discuss the other matters contained in his bill. That the reason why we made reference to the bill filed by the gentleman from Batangas is to really take into consideration the financial capacity of LGUs, bearing in mind the current requirements relative to the such as the certificate of net debt net debt service ceiling, which would increase, and I agree, totally agree with the good gentleman that it would likewise be increased if the Mandanas ruling will be applied come 2022. But considering that our bill right now is not yet taking into consideration the financial and even economic implications and budgetary implications of what the Mandanas ruling will unravel, I ask the permission of the good gentleman that we lift a portion from his bill relative to the transport system, Mr. President. Not the total package of his very novel proposed legislation, which is anchored on the implementation of the Mandanas ruling, which is probably 2 Congresses away. But he is correct, Mr. President. We have to plan for that Mandanas rulings applications, specifically when we go through the budget hearing of 2022 or even 2021. And I surmise that the economic cluster will be providing us the necessary inputs. That the implications would not just be for the transport industry or the LGUs, but for the entire bureaucratic spectrum, Mr. President. That's how huge the impact is of the Supreme Court ruling relative to the Mandanas case, Mr. President. But I recognize the importance of the bill filed by the good gentleman, and I assure him that the other aspects will still be heard. We just lifted a portion of the bill
Yes.
filed by the gentleman,
And
Mr. President.
just to put on record, no? I already explained earlier the purpose of the bill I filed, which I filed, and there is a section on infrastructure projects in Section 5, and I listed here local public buildings and other infrastructure, local roads and bridges, local drainage, flood mitigation, flood control system, local transport infrastructure, local agricultural and irrigation facilities, local educational infrastructure, local health infrastructure, local social welfare infrastructure, local housing and resettlement projects, local water supply and sanitation infrastructure, local solid waste management infrastructure, local jail and prison infrastructure, local public enterprise infrastructure, local electrification infrastructure, and other infrastructure projects to be identified by the Department of the Interior and local government. But having said that, if one of the 15, such as local transport infrastructure, is included in this measure, for as long as that there is assurance from the committee chair that at the appropriate time, we hear the substantive portions of Senate Bill number 1065, I will have no objection that a part of this is considered in committee report number 25 insofar as one item is concerned with regard to Section 5 infrastructure projects, and the other substantive portions of the measure be deliberated by the committee in the future.
I assure, Mr. President, the good gentleman from Batangas that Senate Bill 1065 will be heard in due time by the Committee on Local Government.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
All right, with that assurance, we thank the distinguished gentleman from Cavite and, of course, support the concern of Batangas Governor Senator Ralph Recto. Any objection to the motion? Empowered 2. Hearing no objection, adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I may proceed now, Mr. President.
Still on page 1?
On page 2, Mr. President.
Page 2.
Page 2, line number 13. It's line number 12, Mr. President.
Line 12.
After the word conducted. After the word conducted.
Conducted is in line 13.
Line 13. I'm sorry,
All
Mr.
right,
President.
line 13.
I'm having a problem with my reading glass.
Right.
Line 13.
After conducted.
After conducted, insert the paragraph to read as follows. Provided further, comma, that projects implemented under this provision shall not be subjected to regulations set forth by relevant national government agencies, comma, such as but not limited to, comma, franchise and certificate of public convenience requirements by the Land Transportation, Franchising, and Regulatory Board, and prior approval by the National Economic Development Authority, period. Provided finally that national transportation and mobility safety standards under pertinent laws and protocols, comma, and the budgetary requirements provided for under Section 324 of this code shall be complied with, Mr. President. I so move.
Period.
Period, Mr. President.
The minority leader is recognized.
Mr. President, this proposed amendment is totally different and is a departure from the essence of the committee report. In fact, this was not included in the committee report, and therefore we had no opportunity to examine it very closely. This has very wide-ranging policy implications and would have to be examined closely. Unfortunately, as we said, this was not included in the original committee report. I do not know whether this was presented during the committee hearings, which would enable the resource persons to express their views, particularly the policy makers of the executive branch. It is in that regard that we move that we defer action on these proposed amendments, allow our colleagues to study it very closely, and subject it to examination in a subsequent session, Mr. President. For those reasons, we ask that we defer action on this proposed amendment.
Before we act on the motion, because it has a higher priority, we recognize Senator Lacson.
Thank you, Mr. President. And to add to the concern aired by the minority leader, I wonder how this will be consistent with the phrase provided that interconnectivity and integration with the existing and proposed national intermodal transportation systems, etc., etc. Kasi if we remove all the regulations and requirements being required by national agencies, how can we sync in the existing and even the proposed national intermodal transportation system, Mr. President? Baka magkasala-salabat, Mr. President. So necessarily, a study by NEDA is needed, Mr. President.
All right, Senator Tolentino,
Mr.
to
President,
respond.
if I may respond. The first amendment this representation proposed was the phrase consistent with national transportation policies. And it is so overarching, Mr. President, that it would encompass current policies of the DOTR, NEDA, and other policy-making bodies. And I'm having here in front of me the National Transport Policy, the NTP, which would refer to the improvement of modal interchange areas, promotion of intermodality in urban transit with due consideration to appropriate technology within the hierarchy of modes, implementation of traffic engineering solutions such as transport systems, the ITS, in the operation of transport systems, collaboration of LGUs, and the academy enhancing institutional capacity, among others. It would not totally do away with existing interconnectivity, Mr. President. In fact, it would enhance, because we reiterated here the national transportation policies. And as to the concern, Mr. President, of the good gentleman from Iloilo, precisely with due respect, we inserted this provision of the need, the need or the lack of the need for a certificate of public conveyance, precisely because it came out of the interpellation, the parliamentary exchange we had several years ago, when the good gentleman, if I may recall, and the transcripts would show, asked me directly, this representation, if there is a need for a franchise, if there is a need for a CPC. And my point-blank answer, Mr. President, is that it will not entail an additional franchise. For instance, a monorail for Cebu. Will that need a franchise from the LTFRB? So my answer then was, since this law will provide itself the franchise, there is no more need. I just clarified this, and this was asked of me by the minority leader, and the same is true with the NEDA requirement, because he asked me if I should place it as part of the amendment, the need for prior approval of the NEDA. So we are not inserting something that was not discussed, Mr. President. In fact, this was lengthily discussed, the requirements for a franchise. If you get a permit to operate a short-haul monorail, LTFRB has no authority to grant a franchise. If you operate a short-distance ferry system, LTFRB has nothing to do with that. Perhaps Marina can, because under the local government code, LGUs can operate a ferry system. What we are doing right now, Mr. President, is just clarifying. We are not doing away, because if you read the previous paragraph, Mr. President, it is stated here that provided that interconnectivity and integration with existing and proposed I'm referring to lines 8 and 9, with proposed national intermodal transportation systems, as well as those of other local government units, shall be considered, and consultations with relevant national government transportation and planning agencies shall be conducted. And Mr. President, we have the Regional Development Council. Even if you propose, even if an LGU proposes, it will be heard by the RDC. And the RDC, as among its membership, all the relevant government agencies. I assure the good gentleman that we are not doing away with national transportation policies. We are strengthening it. We are not doing away with interconnectivity. We are highlighting it. We are not inserting a provision that was never discussed during the period of interpellation. We are reiterating it. In fact, we considered the wisdom coming from the minority leader that we insert the questions which he proposed during that period of interpellation, and it's now part of the amendment, Mr. President. So, with due respect to the good gentleman from Iloilo, the reason why these amendments are here is because it came from his wisdom, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Yes.
we
Senator
take
Freeman.
exception to those statements. All we asked during the interpellation is whether or not those permits from the national agencies will be dispensed with. It was a question that we raised. And so apparently, the decision of the good sponsor is to dispense with it. We never suggested in the course of the interpellation that we should dispense with all of these requirements from the national agencies. We asked the sponsor for his views. And now he is presenting this amendment, in effect saying that it is the view of the committee that we do not need the concurrence of the national agencies, and therefore we raise the issue of whether or not that is a correct policy. And Senator Lacson also said the same thing.
All
So that's our clarification.
The explanation of the gentleman is well taken. And I think the motion of the minority leader, which has a higher precedence than the original motion, which is to approve the amendment, we'll probably give the members a chance to review the amendment. So the motion is to defer action on this particular amendment only. Now, is anyone objecting to the motion? We will have to act on the motion first before we continue. Any objection to the motion to defer this particular amendment? Hearing none, the amendment is deferred until further action. You may continue, Senator Tolentino, with the
Mr.
rest of the
President,
amendments.
relative to the last amendment, this is on the same page, page 2,
Two.
line 23. Line 23, after before the word local, add the phrase consistent with section 33.
Line 23,
23.
there is no local on line 23.
Local government code, local government units, Mr. President.
That is line 21. Huh? 24? 34, 24. LGUs. Agreed upon by the participating
I have
LGUs. Is
here-
that the one? 24? Your eyeglasses are again
No, I
deceiving you.
think I
huh?
have the old version, Mr. President.
Ah, I see. Okay.
21, Mr. President.
21, all right. 21.
Consistent with section 33 of this code, comma.
Uh-oh.
Consistent,
In support of such undertaking, comma, the LGUs concerned, is that...
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
All right, session suspended.
Hindi kasi, hindi, na-delete ko.
Ay, may kamuntik mong buton. No, ma?
Mr. President, I'm ready to resume.
Session resumed. Senator Tolentino.
With apologies, Mr. President, because I was of the impression that the amendments that was deferred was adopted. So it's line 14, Mr. President.
Ah, line 14.
Line 14.
Ah, I see. Oh,
Line
not
14.
LGUs, local government units, line
Yes.
14.
Before the
All right.
before the word local, we add the phrase consistent with section 33 of this code, comma. I so move, Mr. President.
Consistent. Section 3. Oh, yeah. Any objection? Hearing none, amendments adopted. What is the
Section-
Senator Recto versus recognized? He's asking
Section-
what is section 33?
Section 33, Mr. President, has reference to the power of the LGUs to consolidate resources,
You're talking of section 33 of the local government
local
code?
government code, Mr.
Ah,
President. Because this is an amendment, the local government code. So it's, it-
that's why you're
it
not spelling
reinforces-
it out.
it reinforces the section 33 of the local government code, which is entitled cooperative undertakings among local government units. And this is likewise highlighted by Article 10, Section 13 of the Philippine Constitution, encouraging LGUs to work together to achieve mutually beneficial results, Mr. President.
Yes.
Just
Senator
a
Recto.
manifestation, Mr. President. If that is the case, then it is already allowed in the local government code. Is that correct?
Correct, Mr. President. So we're just reinforcing this, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you very much.
This is not surplusage, but a reinforcement, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, amendments adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no further amendments.
All right, Majority Leader? Yeah, we have to suspend the period
Yes,
of
Mr.
amendments because there is
What we'll do is,
one
since we
pending.
are going to study the particular amendment that was proposed by Senator Tolentino, I move that we suspend, we'll ask for a clean copy of what was already amended today and accepted. May we recognize Senator Recto?
I'm sorry,
Senator
Mr.
Recto,
President,
Senator
Majority
Recto.
Leader. Based on our earlier agreement on the consideration of my Senate Bill 1065, our understanding is that it is only in partial consideration.
Yes.
Thank you very much, yes.
So Senate Bill 1211 is a completely different bill.
Just to put on record, Mr. President.
Yes.
Just to put on record,
Majority
the
Leader.
good sponsor has agreed to continue hearing the bill of Senator Recto, our Senate President Pro Tem.
Correct,
Yes.
Mr. President. Senate Bill 1065.
And yes, and for the record, this bill does not preempt Senate Bill 1065.
That's
All
correct,
right.
as what I was, my understanding earlier, Mr. President.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Mr. President. So, with that, Mr. President, we'll just request the Secretariat to prepare a clean copy of what was already approved in the
Yes.
committee report in terms of amendments. And with that, we move to suspend consideration of the period of, or the measure, Mr. President,
So,
Senate Bill
consideration of the measure, yes.
211.
Okay, Majority Leader, may we also ask that the Senator Tolentino be asked to, or required to submit to the members of the Senate a copy of his proposed amendment?
This proposed amendment,
That we
yes.
suspended
Absolutely,
consideration
Mr.
of.
President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of the measure suspended.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with that, we suspended the measure, Mr. President. We move to take up another matter. I move, Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1224. This is the good manners and right conduct, sir. A happy bill.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration
you.
of the measures in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, may we recognize the sponsor, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian,
Sherwin.
and, are you going to interpret it?
Senator Gatchalian, gentleman from Valenzuela, is recognized to continue
Our dear
the
Minority Floor
sponsorship.
Leader will no longer interpolate the measures listed here, but if I may be allowed, as principal sponsor, mine is friendly interpolation, Mr. President, just to clarify.
All right.
Ask a few
Still in the
clarificatory
period of
questions.
interpolation as a parliamentary status, the sponsor is recognized and the Majority Leader taking over the Minority Leader to interpolate.
Di po, friendly interpolation. I'm the principal author of this measure. Just to ask for clarificatory questions. It's very simple, Your Honor, Mr. President. Basically, on the measure good conduct, good manners and right conduct to be reestablished and taught once again in our school system, particularly the public school system. May I just ask the sponsor, what would be the, how quickly can we implement this measure? I mean, if we pass it, becomes a law, Mr. President, did the DepEd commit on the new calendar year of 2020 to 2021?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the DepEd did not commit explicitly, but from my analysis of the situation, Mr. President, right now, edukasyon sa pagpapakatao is being taught right now, although in a very limited time. In grades 1 to 3, it's being taught 30 minutes per day. In grades 4 to 6, being taught 20 minutes per day. And in senior high school, which is grade 7 to 12, it's being taught 1 hour per day for 2 weeks, twice a week, Mr. President. So my analysis, Mr. President, it's being taught right now. And the bill calls for the expansion of this program to include specifically GMRC, Good Manners and Right Conduct, because GMRC is modeled in edukasyon sa pagpapakatao. In fact, because of the limited time, the teachers cannot teach this in detail. In fact, this morning, Mr. President, I went to DepEd Valenzuela to see firsthand on how edukasyon sa pagpapakatao is being taught. And consistently, we hear from the teachers na hindi kaya in 30 minutes or 20 minutes, Mr. President. So in short, we can launch this program this year, school year 2022 to 2021, because we can just expand the curriculum being taught through edukasyon sa pagpapakatao, Mr. President.
I can recall clearly that, well, at least the more senior members than us would say that during their time, this was a course
Yes.
taught in grade school and high school,
Correct.
in
This
both
was
public and elementary schools.
The majority
Mr. President.
leader is right. This was a subject. It was a graded subject.
We should ask the
That's correct,
senior senators, Mr.
I always
President.
got 95 in GMRC.
Galing mo po. So yes, at least at one point in time, Mr. President, this was actually part of the curriculum.
But right now, it's not.
No longer, sir.
Oh, okay. And what this bill wants to,
To return it back to the curriculum, Mr. President.
a subject,
Yes.
graded
Because-
subject.
And the reason why we feel that nawala na sa atin yung respeto na binibigay natin sa ating mga seniors sa society. No? We lost the mano po, opo. We lost many traits, cleanliness, respect for elders, because I firmly believe it is no longer being taught in subjects in school. Whereas countries like Japan, and the good sponsor can correct me if I'm wrong, countries like Japan and Singapore, they have lessons similar to this. And that is why if you look at the Japanese, they're so clean in their surroundings. Apparently in school, they're taught before they start classes to clean the surroundings of the school and to make it second nature po when they start the school and when they close the day in school. In Singapore, that's discipline that they're being taught. And that's why disiplinado ang ating mga kapatid na Singaporeans is because it's part of the curriculum. And we feel that there's no harm being done if we bring this back to our curriculum in the DepEd, Mr. President.
And that is what your bill seeks to achieve.
That's correct, Mr. President. So,
Yes, all right.
and give more time to it because they have a subject now, once a week lang po, Mr. President, or twice a week. It's not enough to inculcate to our children the good manners and right conduct.
It's all right if it's twice a week, but as long as it's 45 minutes or 1 hour.
30 minutes nga lang, sir.
Yeah.
It's twice a week, 30 minutes.
Magkwekwentuhan lang yung teacher saka yung wala na yun.
Opo, sir. So,
Tama yun,
Yes,
Mr. President. In fact, sabi ng mga teachers, because it's being taught during the early times, no, when the student comes in at around 6 or 7, that's the time they teach edukasyon sa pagpapakatao. And more often than not, a lot of students are late. Sometimes the teachers are late. So it's not being given a lot of emphasis. But
It's
the
not a
bottom line,
priority,
Mr. President, is we are not turning values education and GMRC as a core subject. It will be treated the same with mathematics, with science, and with
Graded
other
subject,
subjects.
yeah.
Because right now, it's really relegated to a minor, even subjects that are not given importance, Mr. President.
So with this law, Mr. President, just to ask the sponsor, we are now grading, it's a graded subject,
It's a course, they call it a core subject.
core
A
subject.
core subject. That's
Mr.
the-
President, with the indulgence of my two seatmates, may I
With
just
their,
be
yes,
allowed to
Senator
interject?
Villanueva.
Yes, Mr. President, being one of the principal authors of this measure, I think it's important to emphasize the importance of integrating this comprehensive values education in our curriculum. So it would not be just one subject, but it would also be taught in mathematics, in science. For example, if you are conducting experiments, Mr. President, you teach not only to report the right data that you are getting from the experiment, but you also emphasize the importance of reporting the right data because that is honesty. So I think it is important to integrate, and I'm sure the distinguished sponsor is aware of this practice, Mr. President. Thank you.
Mr. President, to add to that, no, the good sponsor, Senator Villanueva, included a very important feature in the bill. It's called character building activities. Right now, Mr. President, everything's taught theoretically. No? They have a book, they're being taught theoretically, and the students will just come in, listen, and when they go out, they forget everything. But with the character building activities, as proposed by Senator Villanueva, they'll have role playing, they'll have practical approach, they'll have experiential methodologies and experiential approach, so that it will be ingrained in their minds and also in their character, Mr. President.
That's perfect, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, I really laud the good majority floor leader for us sponsoring this bill. He is truly a model for good manners
Did you have that in your
and
elementary
right
grades?
conduct, Mr.
Majority
President.
leader?
Hindi na po siguro, I was in the 80s. And would the gentleman know when they stopped teaching this in the DepEd?
Yes, Mr. President, actually the earlier or the original concept of this
Good manners and right conduct.
good manners, right conduct was instituted in 1939 by President Manuel Quezon,
Quezon.
Mr. President. And then throughout the years, it had a lot of changes and evolution, Mr. President. In fact, it was in 2010 when they converted it into ESP. And that's a time when we were also implementing the K-12 program. And when they fully implemented the K-12 program, that's when they reduced the time to 30 minutes and 20 minutes.
But I can
Mr.
recall,
President.
Mr. President, during my time, it was more araling panlipunan and homeroom. Eh yung homeroom, tinuturuan kami niyan, magtahi, maglaba, magluto, mag-ayos ng bahay, but not necessarily on morals and right conduct, good morals and right conduct. So I think it evolved in the...
It evolved, Mr. President.
After the 80s, medyo nag-evolve na po siya. And it's absolutely correct. When you ask the students now, Mr. President, apparently the teachers only touch on these subjects really quickly in the morning. It's not graded, so it's not important for them. Unlike tamang sinabi ni Senator Gatchalian, our chairperson, that if this becomes a core subject, Mr. President, maybe they can have immersions in communities where they're actually helping the elderly. I remember when I was younger, one of the requirements, we were supposed to assist the elderly crossing the street. So, kami, position sa iba't ibang kanto ng Makati at that time, sa labas pa ng Makati, sa San Agustin po ako, so we were in Makati. And we had to, and it was graded, and we were told what to do and how to assist the elderly in crossing the street, and yung pagpalinis ng mga kapaligiran. Of course, this was a throwback of the martial law time because this was before 86. But now, Mr. President, it's no longer priority. And if the last New Year's celebration was any indication of how we have deteriorated as a people, because apparently I heard that they collected 26 tons of garbage in Luneta after the New Year's celebration. 26 tons is a lot of garbage, Mr. President. And things, simple things such as cleanliness can be taught and inculcated in this course. So I thank the good sponsor for taking this up, Mr. President. Today, I think it may not be a very complicated measure, but this has long-term...
It's a happy bill, Mr. President.
It's a happy measure. Has long-term effects to our society, and I had no longer any other questions to ask.
And
All right,
Mr.
so-
President, I would just like to add some of the salient features, Mr. President. We heard anecdotes of teachers being, or non-productive teachers or teachers with not very good record being assigned to teach ESP, Mr. President. Because ESP, or Edukasyon sa Pagpapakatao, is considered a minor or irrelevant subject, Mr. President. That's why in the bill we strengthen the requirement to teach values education and GMRC. Did you know, Mr. President, that there is a course concentrating in values education? Pero hindi ho sila nagtuturo ng values education. So here in the bill, we will now give preference to teachers who have concentrated in values education to teach values education and GMRC para hindi sino-sino lang huli nalagay ho doon. So that's one of the features that we included. And of course, the participation of the parents. It's important also the parents participate. It's not only the job of the teachers to inculcate good manners and value formation, but the parents also need to participate. So we included also the participation of the parents through the whole of school approach, Mr. President. So those are the salient features, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. With that, Mr. President, no other member who wish to interpolate the measure, I move to close the period of interpolation.
Any objection? Hearing none, period of interpolation is closed.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of amendments.
Period of amendments open. Senate, the sponsor is recognized.
Mr. President, I just would like to recall my motion, and the sponsors requesting if we can just open the period of amendments on Monday, Mr. President.
All right, then
For the record.
the motion is withdrawn.
And, Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1224. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration is suspended.
You want to take up the holidays? Okay. May we ask for 1 minute suspension, Mr. President? One long Senate minute, Mr. President.
All right, session suspended for some Senate minutes. hindi naman nakalagay sa ano eh. Wala sa...
Ito daw yung ano. Okay, sir.
Session resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just some, I move to proceed with the reference. We have a last additional
Yes.
reference of business, Mr. President.
The Secretary will proceed with the additional reference of business.
Message from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 4 February 2020, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House number 5829, titled An Act Institutionalizing Values Education in the Curriculum by Incorporating Good Manners and Right Conduct as a subject in kindergarten up to grade 3 level.
Referred to the Committee on Basic Education, Arts and Culture.
House number 5422, an act declaring month of October every year as the National Cooperative Month in the entire country.
Referred to the Committee on Cooperatives.
House number 5869, an act defining electronic violence against women and their children, providing protective measures and prescribing penalties for violations thereof, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 9262, otherwise known as the Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act of 2004.
Referred to the Committees on Women and Science and Technology.
House number 2674, an act establishing a district branch of the Land Transportation Office LTO in the municipality of Labo in the 1st District of Camarines Norte and appropriating funds therefore.
Referred to the Committees on Public Services and Finance.
And House number 5888, an act establishing the 3rd District Engineering Office of the municipality of Melang, province of Cotabato, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committee on Public Works and Finance.
Bill on first reading, Senate number 1324, entitled An Act Declaring the Month of October of every year as the National Cooperative Month, introduced by Senator Ontiveros.
Referred to the Committee on Cooperatives.
Resolution, PS Resolution number 316, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the effects of novel coronavirus acute respiratory disease, international health emergency on the Philippine tourism sector with the end in view of recommending a tourism mitigation and response plan addressing the effects of health emergencies, calamities, and catastrophes, introduced by Senator Binay.
Referred to Committees on Tourism and Health. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a few housekeeping matters. Mr. President, since only a portion of Senator Recto's Senate Bill number 1065, or the Local Build Program Act, was partially considered in the committee report number 25 of the Committee on Local Government, Public Works, Ways and Means and Finance, with the consent of the body, Mr. President, I move that the said bill, Senate Bill number 1065, be returned to the concerned committees for further public hearings, separate consideration, and report.
Its original referral.
Yes, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Before we adjourn, Mr. President, we have a guest from Argentina who's very well known in the cooperative movement, Mr. President. We have with us here today the President of the International Cooperative Alliance, President, distinguished Honorable Gentleman Ariel Guarco from Buenos Aires, Argentina. And he was elected as the President of the ICA General Assembly in 2017 in Kuala Lumpur. He was also he founded actually, or rather, he's a cooperative leader that's undertaken the cooperative movement development process in his country in Argentina, and is president of the Confederation of Cooperatives of Argentina. He is honoring us with this visit, Mr. President. Together with him is the regional director of the ICA, Mr. Balu Iyer, and Mr. Guarco is here with us. We also have with us the chairman of the CDA, Chairman Orlando Ravanera, and CDA board member Mirla Paradillo, and cooperative leaders representing the Philippine Cooperative Center, the NATCO, COOP-NATCO Network, Federation of Sustainable Peoples Development Corp.
All right.
For the record.
Bienvenido, and welcome to the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President. With that, to allow us time to also greet the good gentleman and visitor, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday, February 10, 2020. So,
Any objection? Hearing none, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, February 10, 2020. Pwede.